Welcome to I Could Talk to You All Day. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz, recovering workaholic, perfectionist, and people pleaser.
And I'm John Spears, emerging from playing small, getting caught up in the inertia of life, and always being on.
I Could Talk to You All Day is a show for executives and emerging leaders. This is not just another leadership podcast. We're here to talk about what it means to be a leader while also being human.
So join us for raw, vulnerable, and probably pretty funny conversations about shifting from surviving at work and home to thriving in the life you've always wanted. Let's get the conversation started. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, John.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
Doing well. It is always good to see you. I know I just saw you in person a few days ago. We're on the Zoom now recording this. And it's good to see you. We had a really great conversation prior to this recording around lots of like deep stuff. And it's just really cool to be able to have someone in my life where I can be completely open and honest. And I love that we have this opportunity to do that in like IRL in real life. And also when we're recording a podcast and a conversation around some of these really important issues that leaders face today.
I totally agree. I love about our friendship that we just hop into it. There's no, can I talk to you about something? There's no, do you have time or energy for me? And we're just able to dive right in. And I love that we bring that to this podcast. I listened back to some of our episodes and I'm just so proud that we have jumped right in and gotten vulnerable with each other, with our listeners. And the feedback that we get from people is that it feels like they're sitting in the room and talking to us. And I just adore that. And I love that we both bring that energy into the room.
Yeah. And so sorry for all the listeners that we like. I think we often begin podcasts with this love fest. And so sorry, but find yourself a Lauren if you don't have one.
Find yourself a John. It's worth
it. I just have to say, I've had just a few really challenging weeks. And I think I said this maybe last time or 2 times ago, but to have someone who is like a rock in your life that you can go to and will just be with you. It doesn't have to offer solutions or perspective, but just to be with you in kind of the muck is just really amazing. And I think the older I get, I just celebrated a birthday. I'm 42 now. Happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I think the older that I get, the more important that connection is to me and the harder it is for me to find it in the world. I think it's just hard to make new friends when you're older. It's hard to continue to develop deep relationships when you're busy and you have kids or you're traveling and life kind of catches up with you. And so I'm just super grateful for you, Lauren, but I also want to encourage folks, and this is not what we're talking about today, but to encourage folks to find someone to create space in your life for connection and community. I don't know if I would have been able to have gotten through the past few months without someone like Lauren in my life.
John. Thank you. That's so
You're
kind. I feel exactly the same way. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I had a little crisis and I called you and I just cried and you just sat on the phone with me and let me cry. And it's really special to have those kinds of friendships. And I know you said this isn't related to our topic today, but it kind of is.
It is. Yeah, you're right.
So tell everybody what our topic is, and then I'll tell you all why I think it's so related.
Okay, so don't forget this thought. But as folks that are going on this journey with us, we began some of these conversations around executive presence. We talked about sort of the traditional sense of executive presence being what you say, how you look, what you do, and having all of these external expectations of what a leader should be. And in all of my reading, I haven't found anything about who a leader is being and sort of what's happening on the inside of a leader. And I think it's our perspective and our assertion that what's happening on the inside is way, way, way more important than those external manifestations. I think you can't be confident and you're not authentic unless you have that sort of inner knowing of yourself, and you deal with trauma in your life or stuff that's happening in your life and get really clear and flat on the inside. It's really challenging to be confident and to say the right things or do the right things, right? If there's kind of chaos happening inside. And so we've had, I think, some really great conversations around vulnerability, authenticity, kindness, and courage. And today we're talking about something that I think is at the core of being a healthy person, but also being a healthy leader. And that's boundaries.
I love talking about boundaries. And I love that our conversation started this way, because the way that I used to hold boundaries had me unavailable for a friendship like ours, had me unavailable to create this podcast, because my boundaries were such that I saved my time, energy, and space for work. I thought that's what I was good at, which it was. I thought it was the only thing I was good at, which was incorrect. And I thought, for me, the way to be a leader was to create boundaries around everything else so that I was always available for work. So as we started having this conversation today, and you're saying, oh, it's not really related to the topic, it all came together in my head that it sure is, because former me, who's still current me, but it's a path. Former me wouldn't have made the time, wouldn't have opened my eyes to the opportunity for our friendship, and wouldn't have created the space for myself to get vulnerable. And so it's a little bit off the line of work, right? But the impact of me shifting my boundaries is that I was able to open up my world beyond work.
I love that you talked about your relationship with boundaries, because I think for me, and you've talked a little bit about it from a work perspective, from a very personal perspective, I don't remember being taught boundaries. I don't remember having conversations in my home about boundaries. I don't remember learning boundaries at school. You obviously some very basic ones, you kind of, sort of quote right or wrong, or, I just remember having some of those conversations in school about sort of people touching your body and that kind of stuff. But there's so much more to that. And that's obviously very important. But I think in terms of boundaries, when we think about sort of respecting our needs, who we are as people, right? We're all very different. So we have different needs. We have unique needs. We have different perspectives. We have different emotions. And so when I think about honoring that and really respecting that and creating boundaries around that so that internally you're at peace and you're at balance and you feel comfortable and safe, I just wish I learned that sooner. And I think I could have saved myself a ton of heartbreak in challenging situations if I, one, learned that earlier, and two, learned how to set boundaries, learned what that meant, learned how to do that. I remember when I first started setting boundaries, I was so uncomfortable. It was unnatural to me because I had never done it. I did not see it modeled in a healthy way growing up. And so, as all things are when they're new, it's uncomfortable. And I was feeling uncomfortable about having boundaries. And so that made it awkward. And I sort of fumbled my way through that until I practiced enough to practice two things: practice knowing myself enough and what I wanted and what I needed, and then practicing articulating that and verbalizing that to other people, not necessarily for them, but for my sake, for me, so that I was really clear about what I was available for and what I wanted in every area of my life.
I think when we're little, we are taught to respect our elders and respect authority and say yes to those people who are some level of authority over us automatically. So our teachers, our parents, our friends' parents, any kind of grown-up, if they asked us to do something, we did it. And when you learn that as you keep growing, you then get into the work world and nobody tells you, cool, now you're a grown-up, you get to set boundaries. You get to decide what you're available for. You get to decide what your aspirations are. You get to decide what the balance of how much time and energy you spend in one place is versus another place. And because we don't learn that, there's no point at which that switch turns on. We need to recognize we have choices.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, we go through this like reactive life where work comes at us, we do the work, we get a raise, we do more work, we get promoted. And a lot of us don't even think about what that means, what we want, what's next, what other careers could we have, what can we decide? And so we just sort of go through life being stressed and panicked because there's too much. There's not enough joy in it. And we don't have the time to think about anything else.
So, Lauren, I think maybe this is just me, but I think it would be helpful for us to talk about what boundaries are. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on like, what are boundaries? Why are they important for us to establish and to create in our lives?
Yeah. So I think you and I have a little bit of maybe opposing views on where the idea of boundaries come from.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll tell you mine. And when you tell me yours, I think it's going to lead to really interesting discussion. So my relationship with boundaries is saying no. My relationship with boundaries is I always said yes to everything. And therefore I had no boundaries. I was available for everybody else. I was available to do all of the things and be all of the things. And I spent really no time on myself. So for me, figuring out what my boundaries were, my limits, my things that I was going to be available for and my things that I was not going to be available for really started with no, with being able to say no, with being able to think no and cut some stuff out of my life, set new boundaries so that then I could figure out what boundaries I wanted to open and where I wanted to go. So I'm interested to hear your take on that because I think it's pretty different.
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience with boundaries, and I mentioned a little bit before, is, growing up, I didn't learn about them. I didn't know about them. I've mentioned on this podcast before, my dad left when I was 8. I didn't have a relationship with him. I reached out to him when I was 20. We talked for a few weeks. And on Father's Day of 2001, I called him and his phone was disconnected and I didn't hear from him again. In fact, I didn't hear anything about him until the Miami-Dade Police Department called me and said, "Hey, sorry to let you know that your dad is dead," X amount of years later. So it was a pretty big shock. And I think, but I say that because I think my experience with boundaries comes from a place of fear of abandonment, right? So I said yes. I said a yes a lot, but I didn't even know if I was really saying yes. I just think I was going through the inertia and I didn't know how to set boundaries or sort of where I ended and another person began. And so when I think about boundaries now, I think about it from a perspective of what am I available for? Like, what do I want in my life? And almost like a physical boundary, like a fence or, a plot of land that has a fence around it. I think about saying what's in and what's out, what I want in my space, what I want in my life, and what I don't want in my life. And I think for a really long time, I had a really negative relationship with boundaries because I think for me, if I said no, if I said no, or I said, this is out of my space, then there would be rejection, there would be pain. And my experience since drawing a perimeter around myself and saying, this is what I want in my space, this is what I want in my life, this is what I want in my work life, this is what I want in my romantic life and my relationship with my kids. It is restricting, but there's a lot of clarity in that. And I think where there is clarity, there is freedom. I know more now than ever what I'm available for in life. And I am willing to say that to myself. I'm willing to explore that with myself. I'm willing to say that to other people. And I'm willing, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, I'm willing to experience the consequences, both good and bad, around being really clear about what I want and what I'm available for and what I'm not available for.
I love that. And I love hearing your perspective because I think there are probably 1,000 ways to come at it. But I think what you and I are talking about are two different ways to come about it,
Mhm.
right? So a boundary is a barrier, right? It's a barrier that either has been created for you or that you create for yourself. And what you saw was you already had all of these fences up and you decided to become available and remove some boundaries.
Mhm.
And what I saw was I had no fences up for anything but myself. All my
Mhm.
fences were for me, about me, inside of me. And so I let everybody else in. I had no fences up. And so it's interesting to see that we actually came from pretty similar circumstances of how we learned about boundaries.
Yeah.
But the way that we grew into them was you recognizing you wanted to pull some down and me recognizing I wanted to pull some up.
Yeah. No, I think that's right on.
Mhm.
So we've talked a little bit about like what boundaries are, our relationship to boundaries. I would love to hear your perspective on what are the consequences of boundaries, both good and bad.
That's an interesting question. So my path to boundaries has been that I needed to learn to say no to a bunch of things. Then I wasn't as busy. And then I decided what to say yes to. And I'm still deciding what to say yes to. That's my new look at boundaries, is what do I want to become available for? And the consequences of boundaries that are negative potentially is that there are some people who aren't in my life, work-wise, professionally, personally, who were when I didn't set boundaries, some of whom took advantage of my willingness to say yes to anything and have me do free work, that sort of thing. And some of whom just weren't fitting into the direction that my life was going. In setting those boundaries, in setting boundaries around the amount of time I was willing to give to work, I actually found I was able to be more creative and more productive and more effective. So not all of the consequences are bad. I also was able to figure out that this little side gig of coaching that I'd been playing with for all of these years with no formal structure, with no intention around it, actually could be something. And I actually was interested in it. And I don't think I would have discovered that if I hadn't started setting boundaries and deliberately deciding who and how I wanted to be. And so for me, there were some negative consequences. Like sometimes people got mad if I set a boundary.
Yeah.
But the positive consequences have been so much more. I've created all of this freedom in my life. I've created new relationships and friendships. I have opened up emotionally and vulnerably in a way that I never imagined I would. I was always there to help other people. I'm fine over here. And it never occurred to me that that could be reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
And so being willing to remove those fences and open that up and say, I've got stuff too that I could use support and help with. The consequences of that have been that I'm in a more joyful, loving world.
Yeah, I agree. All the sort of the good consequences of setting boundaries. I think that as kids, I have two kids. They're 13 and 11, and setting boundaries is incredibly healthy. Saying what is in and out with them, it just creates so much freedom and clarity. We're not having the same discussions over and over again. There's a real clear framework from which that we're operating, and we all are kids on the inside. We're either healing from the past or we're sort of reparenting ourselves. And so I think just as having boundaries for kids is really healthy, I think as adults having boundaries and as leaders having boundaries is incredibly important because it gives us the clarity. And you mentioned freedom. And I think some people, at least I thought this for a very long time, is how can I have freedom if I'm constricting something, if I'm saying no to something? And the reality is that when you get really clear about what you want and what you're available in your life, and you say, this is in and this is out, there is so much freedom for that, both personally, but in relationship. And I don't just mean relationships romantically or personal. I'm talking about the whole gamut of relationships, any sort of relationship with anything. Having that clarity is freeing because it kills ambiguity. We're not kind of second guessing ourselves all the time. That clarity, I think, is incredibly freeing. And I think when I think about the bad, quote, bad consequences, I actually don't think they're bad, right? Because when people get mad at us for setting a boundary, when we set a boundary at work, it provides the clarity we need to see if there's alignment in this relationship. And so, yeah, it might be painful. It might hurt. I am a recovering people pleaser. So I want people to like me. I want people to think I'm great. I want people to love me. And so I, in the past, would do things that were outside my boundaries to gain that affection or that approval. I'm no longer doing that. I'm not available for that in my life. And that's one of the things that is outside my box. I am not doing that anymore because it doesn't serve me. And it ultimately doesn't get what I want in terms of that inner peace, that inner harmony, that inner equilibrium that I think we're all looking for in our lives. And so there might be this initial sting or pang that happens when we say no, when we set a boundary, but ultimately we're creating the life that we want. We're creating the life that is aligned to who we are at our like inmost core and who we are as people.
Yeah, I want to respond to your comment about being a people pleaser. I think we all are.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was the only one. And part of my boundary was that I didn't tell anybody how I was feeling, right? I was always okay. And on the inside, I was like dying a little bit every day because I was losing more and more of me, because as my network expanded, as my work responsibilities expanded, I was spending so much time and energy being that people pleaser, being that perfectionist who just did everything for everyone all the time, that it didn't occur to me that I was allowed to be a people pleaser for myself, that I was allowed to look at that. And so that shift in availability, that opportunity that I finally saw to think about, well, what's going to please me? What's going to make me happy? What's going to make me functional? Because I had hit a point in burnout where I was no longer functional.
Yeah.
I was just getting up every day, going and doing the things, going to sleep, and same thing the next day. So really taking that pause and deciding, what do I actually want? Which wasn't fast, by the way. I'm sure it wasn't for you either, right? You don't just wake up one day and say like, I'm not a people pleaser anymore. And now I work 37 hours a week and I have 16 hobbies and friends all around the world. It takes time. It took time. But recognizing that I did not want to spend the rest of my life being a people pleaser was a great instigator for starting to decide to set boundaries.
Lauren, you just outlined it. We didn't talk about this, and I didn't think about this before, but you just outlined the consequences of not setting boundaries, right? We're afraid to sometimes set boundaries and to create that restriction in our lives. But when we don't set those boundaries, we're suffering. We're not getting what we want or what we need. We're not getting our needs met. And we go through life having this drained experience, this unfulfilled experience. And so as challenging as it is, and I think we're going to move into in a minute how to set boundaries, but as hard as it might be for people who are people pleasers or who have never set boundaries before, as challenging as that might be, the consequences of not setting boundaries in your life are devastating. And it only compounds over time. And so my challenge is, as hard as it is, as challenging as it might be, to create those boundaries, to identify what your needs are, what your wants are, what your values are, and then be able to communicate that to other people. I want to move to the question of how to set boundaries, but I think there's a precursor to that. As I was thinking about how to set boundaries, I actually thought about three things that we've talked about already on these podcasts. And I think there are probably more than that, but I think these are the three core steps to begin to identify what your boundaries are and to begin to communicate them. One is authenticity, knowing who you are, being really clear about who you are, and exploration and sort of really self-expression around that. The second is the ability to be vulnerable, to be able to share those needs and wants with other people. And then the third is around courage, the courage to be able to communicate what you want and what you need to other people, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you're afraid of the outcome.
And I would add the discernment
Hmm.
to make those decisions.
Yeah.
When you're so busy and when you are boundaryless and when you haven't made a conscious decision about how you want things to be, you can be as courageous, vulnerable, and authentic as can be, but you are limited in all of those because you haven't decided. So my first step, and I know we're going to get into how in a minute, but my first step was deciding, which had never occurred to me as an option.
Yeah. So Lauren, we've just talked about setting boundaries at this 30,000 foot view, right? Why, the consequences, what they are, our relationship with it. I'd love to take it kind of step down to a more tactical level of how do we set boundaries? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's such a great question, and it's such a big answer. It starts with making a choice. It starts with recognizing that you are allowed to choose, that you don't have to live in a world where you only react to the chaos around you and you only respond to the people who need you. And recognizing that in the lineup of people you serve, you are in that lineup. You are not just there to serve, you are also there to be served and be helped. So deciding what you're available for, which is what you said earlier, is really important. I also think learning to say no is really important. And that's a whole episode. Learning to say no, deciding to say no, how to say no. So I'm going to save the details of that for when we get to an episode where we talk about that. But for me, the most powerful thing was taking a pause. Instead of the automatic, yeah, I'll do it, yeah, I'll help, I'm in for that. And which meant saying no to myself. Taking the pause and thinking, is this within my boundaries? And really deciding. And it takes work and it takes time and it takes energy and support. Don't try to do everything alone. We say that all the time.
Yeah.
And it's also possible for anyone. If I could go from working 80 to 100 hours a week and basically only ever doing that to the life that I've built now, literally anyone can.
And if I could go from being completely enmeshed with other people and being a massive people pleaser and not even knowing who I was or what I wanted or my own values to someone who's very clear and who has zero problem articulating that to other people, so can you.
Yeah.
I did not learn this stuff until my 30s and probably not until the last few years. And so if it's possible for us, I feel like we're selling something. We're selling boundaries. Like if it's possible for us, it's possible for you. Just,
3 easy payments.
No, we're not asking you for any money. No, there is so much clarity that comes with boundaries that, I would rather have the short-term pain and have long-term inner peace and well-being and satisfaction than go through my life with this drag on my energy.
What's your how, John?
My how of setting boundaries. Again, I think, you've talked a lot about sort of the practical ways. I think mine has been setting up, is creating the space in my life to be able to get to know who I am, to know my values. And for me, that's all I need. I'm built like that. I'm built like, if I'm very decisive, once I'm clear on something, I take action. And so for me, the how came in the sort of exploration, the curiosity, the getting clear with who I am, what I wanted, what I was available for. And once I did that, it's like no going back for me. So I think this conversation is really good because we're built differently in a way. And hopefully other folks will resonate with our approaches and sort of how we approach boundaries or sort of this thing called life. Lauren, I could talk to you all day.
I could talk to you all day, John.
It sounds like we're going to have a part 2 on this around really taking this conversation to the how of setting boundaries and how do you have these conversations and approaches. So I'm really looking forward to that. To our community, to those people that are supporting us and that are listening, please continue to do so. We love recording this podcast and we love getting the feedback that we get on a regular basis on how our perspectives and our experiences resonate with you. So keep on giving us feedback. We love it. Don't forget to rate and to share and to download and to ring the bell on whatever platform you're listening, because we want to continue to support you and partner with you on your journey. Thanks, everyone.
We're so glad you joined us today. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at I Could Talk to You All Day and tell your friends about us.